This is Remo Daily, your daily dose of inspiration. This is Remo Daily, an oasis of innovation for your mind, your soul, and your heart. Connect, act, and recharge with Remo Daily. This is Remo Daily, Remo Daily.
Thank you, Andy. This is Remote Daily, and this is our wonderful guest. Welcome to the virtual stage, Kevin Burke. So glad to have you on.
Thank you. And the music is just wonderful, I might add. I mean, just starting with Georgia on my mind, like it ties in perfectly to the theme. These are places on our minds, you know, even if we're not there physically, right? I'm not in Newburgh today, I'm down here in Brooklyn. It's on my mind. And the way that places like Newburgh exist in our minds is different than other places that we visit. They sit in a deeper place. So thank you for the music. Wonderful.
Thank you. And the other day, I was asked like how we got through this year as a team and with Remote Daily. And I can only say when it comes to hometowns and being at home, I think my true star is Dario because of the pandemic. He has not been home for a very, very long time in the process of juggling visas and lawyers and foreign bureaucracies and foreign mentalities that are just crazy, and all the while not being home and not being home and not being home, and going with the family through all the motions that happen in a pandemic, grieving for loved ones and just not getting home. So Dario, you're I think the rock star of keeping the spirits up while being forcibly away from home. And I hope that you enjoy this moment with us, diving in a little bit into what hometowns do, even when we're far away. So Dario, just giving you a special shout out today, and thank you for the music, as always.
Thank you.
Kevin, I just wanted to have a quick listening experience for everybody because your podcast is so wonderfully produced. And I know that we have some people in our community that have spent time in New York City and around. And of course, one of the icons that you interviewed is Susan Vega. It was the most recent episode.
Yeah.
Susan Vega, the singer-songwriter that I think the whole world knows, just for
yes.
And many other beautiful lines. But this is her signature line. And she gave a little introduction, actually, into where she grew up on the podcast. And I found it just an image that I wanted to share with all of you. Here is Susan Vega on Your Hometown, Kevin's podcast, talking about her hometown, her neighborhood.
That's great.
My East Harlem world was pretty small. We had a front yard, which was different than the other houses in the neighborhood, which were more like tenement houses. And we had a backyard, but it was used like a lot of people threw their garbage out the window. So there was all kinds of stuff back there. And you never knew if you were going to get hit with a flying bottle. So you would not, like, we didn't go out there and play.
New York's waiting for me. New York is made for grander things, just like me.
So the apartment that we moved to on the Upper West Side was big, on 102nd Street. It had 2 long hallways, and it seemed like a palace to me. And of course, as I grew up, my way of traveling into the world sort of grew. My father would send me to the candy store, which was right around the corner, so I didn't have to cross the street. I could just go to the corner, turn right, go to the candy store, get the newspaper, his cigarettes, whatever, I was 6 years old, and they would give me the cigarettes. And I could then come back home. So learning how to cross learning how to cross Broadway was like crossing the ocean for the first time. I mean, it was...
4 lanes, the big
It's
median.
gigantic. I mean, you could get killed,
It's gigantic.
especially as a young, small child.
What a wonderful, just little snippet of story production and images coming to you through your ears. Congratulations, Kevin, on putting this all together.
Thank you.
Why did you actually start your hometown? You were a producer, you were a freelance speechwriter, you graduated from Harvard, you have an amazing array of experiences, and you worked as a producer on wonderful things, such as Finding Your Roots, a PBS series that touches on identity and history. Now you're creating this, and you're getting these moments out of very, very famous people. You just mentioned a few of them. Now we heard Suzanne Vega, and we were there with her on Broadway trying to cross when she was a little child. Why did you actually start this? What led you to getting these people to share?
I mean, it's in many ways there are 2 answers, right? It's been in me for my whole life, kind of this calling to do this, and it's been sort of more immediate. The longer answer is that as a boy, there was nothing that I enjoyed more than sitting around and talking to people, especially my older relatives, about the things that they were most familiar with, which were their hometowns, their stories, their childhoods, their coming of age years. And that was true for my grandmother in Newburgh, my Uncle Ed from Carbondale, Pennsylvania. So it was a deep, deep thirst to know and to listen.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like in many ways, I spent my whole life trying to get back to those conversations because I feel like they were probably the richest that I've ever had. And I've been in, as you mentioned, I've been in classrooms, lecture halls, I've been on film sets, but those are the most meaningful conversations of my life. And I wish I could get them back, and I can't. My Uncle Ed's been gone for 20 years, my grandmother 30 years. It's hard to imagine. So that's kind of the longer view. The more immediate view is that, I like to interview people. I like to talk to them. And in working on shows like Finding Your Roots, I've been fascinated by how really one of the great interviewers of our time, Henry Louis Gates, gets people interested in their ancestry, their DNA, what makes them who they are because of things they can't see, in their past. And I kind of, in my own experiences, feel like the nurture side of the equation, if you will, is just as important or more. Environment is culture, right? And so I felt that the combination of my own desire to know, my own kind of intellectual curiosity about formation stories, which I think are so important, led me to it. I will say that when I first thought of the show, I was going to call it First Acts. It was going to be a show about the first chapters of a person's life. And as I wrestled with it and developed it, it became much more clear in my mind as your hometown, because I realized we can't be unless there are places for us to be from. And that it's the place, it's the childhood bedroom, the house, the street, the neighborhood, the town, the school, the larger community, the region, that ultimately become the circles of our formation. And so I think place and a sense of place became the unlock. And it's true that when I have been interviewing people, it is an exploration of self, right? They're character studies in many ways, but the place is the starting point. It's the vein that opens. And I think that's why we're getting these kinds of stories, is because it gives it a grounding. It's not like an Entertainment Weekly or People magazine interview where you're looking for the juiciest piece of gossip or just to talk about their fame. This is about their formation before they met the world and the world met them. And the idea is that the things that happened to us back there, they loom large, as you read at the beginning, and they cast long shadows. And it's really trying to have conversations in which we explore together the meaning. And I think that's a very important distinction, because it's not an exercise in nostalgia. This is not sentimentality. It's not trying to, the good old days. And back when I was a kid, we used to walk through the snow to school. No, it's about trying to excavate memory in order to derive meaning. And I think when you get to someone like a Suzanne Vega, someone who's a singer and songwriter, that she spent her whole life grappling with experience and giving us art that is partly informed by her experiences, but that becomes part of our own. And so for someone who lives in that space of looking for meaning, this is a very, very, I think, fertile landscape. I mean, to be quite literal about it, to set someone and to see them. And I think the memories that get unlocked when you think about that block or your stoop or the park or the school bus, or there's a different vividness to those. When you, if you, instead of just asking someone about, tell me about your rise to prominence, like that,
Right.
that's very superficial. This is a deeper journey.
And I'm screen sharing your website here. It's a wonderful piece of work. There's a really sizable team actually behind your hometown.
Yeah, absolutely. A wonderful
and
team.
You are creating art for every guest, as we see here for Run DMC. You have a trailer, you have partners,
Yes.
you have these beautiful illustrations for every episode where the protagonists almost become these like larger than life superheroes. It's so wonderful what you turn them into. And you got to be, of course, on all the local media, because I think every local journalist in New York that's what they all want to do, is taking the time to actually diving into these stories. And here are some of the collaborations that you have had with the Museum of City of New York, a wonderful place where you had the chance to actually have virtual conversations as well. So if you want to click on these on yourhometown.org, you can see Kevin in conversation with Suzanne Vega over Zoom, adjacent to the podcast.
That's right.
So a wonderful way to actually prolong and extend the podcast. Here you can see the team. And when I saw all this, and there's a little bit of support names here, the Rockefeller Brothers Fund, Joan K. Davidson, there is individuals named here.
Yes.
You did a lot of fundraising for this. So I wonder, what is the biggest challenge in creating your hometown? When you think about the size that you are running on, the team, the funding, the famous guests, like what are the greatest challenges for you personally?
That's a great point. Well, I mean, I think that anyone in podcasting now or media generally would tell you that you're always chasing people's attention, right? You're always trying to get people to notice. It's a crowded space. So there are challenges, I think, that are built into any project like that. But I do think, and this is something that I thought of as being important from the beginning, was to surround yourself with talented people who believe in the mission of the show. So everyone that works on the show, and I have a really talented team that I work with, that runs from Robert Krulwich, who is one of the co-founders of Radiolab on WNYC and a veteran broadcaster, down to our researcher, Shakila Khan, our art director, you mentioned Nick Gregg, who's done these wonderful drawings, our sound designer and editor, Otis Streeter, and our composer, Sterling Steffen, who's based in Austin, Texas, who's fantastic. You surround yourself with people who believe in the show. That's important. Then you find good partners. And for me, I really thought that each season or chunks of season could be devoted to a single place. So that's where New York comes in. And the Museum of the City of New York, as a co-presenter of the season with me, was the perfect place to start, because their mission is to tell the New York City story from the ground up. It's really very much focused on the 5 boroughs, and they've been a great partner. In terms of the fundraising, I mean, that's something that I wouldn't say comes naturally to me. I don't think a lot of artists, people who are interested in the arts, enjoy doing that. But what I realize is that it's a great way for you to test out your idea, because you have to share it over and over again as you're trying to create a constituency for the idea. And that's really what the fundraising is all about, is you're having conversations with people who are kind enough to take the time, and you explore it together. And if it feels like something that aligns with them and they feel passionate about it too, they want to be part of it. And this would never have been possible without those early seed funders who are really important and named there. And they are largely individuals, although you saw the Kaplan Fund there, but mainly there are people who I connected with. And then the Rockefeller Brothers Fund, in being our lead main sponsor for the New York City season, I mean, their belief in this was monumental and deeply instrumental, and have been wonderful to work with. So yes, fundraising is hard, it's challenging, but it's a really great way to road test the idea and to really think it through. So
may I ask you?
Yes.
May I ask you how much your hometown costs you?
Well, I raised an initial sort of piloting funding of about $35,000. That was to pilot the idea and do a few recordings, which were really critical. And I can't wait to share those because they've not been released yet, but they will be released. And in fact, one of the guests is from Newburgh and one is from Kingston, which is in Hudson Valley, where I'm from. And then the production budget for the New York City season was $200,000.
So a
these are
sizable amount.
not big
Yep.
Hollywood budgets, but sizable
Right.
amount to give ourselves room to do the number of episodes that we've done and to try to do it with care.
And what is the next season going to be like? Season 1 is all New York. We saw the beautiful artwork together with the amazing guests here. And I encourage you all to just click the button and listen more. What is season 2 going to be like? Where do you even go after New York?
Yeah, so I should say we're on our summer hiatus now. We'll be back at the end of September with another half of the New York season. So the New York season will run through early winter 2022. And I'm just now beginning to explore and try to raise the money for the second season. And I hope to have details to share about that soon. But it's something very much on my mind these days. But I mean, the whole idea was to try to fill in one hometown at a time. So the ambition for the show is pretty big. And I look forward to other cities, Miami, LA, Chicago, of course, but also places that are smaller, Fargo, Selma, places like Newburgh. And I hopefully one day we'll see a mix of deeper dives on individual cities like New York, but also individual explorations through a single episode about a town that may be a very small place.
And I mean, it sounds like you're in this for the long haul. Like, what in your dream, how many seasons, how many cities would you like to do? How many years?
What's my life expectancy? I mean, I feel like I will probably always have to find other ways to support myself. I've got 2 kids and a lovely wife and a home, but this is something I hope to be doing when I'm an old man.
Wonderful. And Kevin, we have a guest recommendation here in the chat. We will connect you, of course, afterwards. Wonderful. And I was just thinking about, your sort of you going out there in the world. My family and I, we moved every month to a different New York City neighborhood for an entire year because we were kicked out of 2 apartments in a row and then started turning, the lemons into lemonade kind of thing. Turned into a book and turned into a crazy and beautiful adventure that tied us to New York forever. And one of the strongest ideas I think we have had inside of that was that at the end of every month, we would host a neighborhood dinner. We would just invite people that we had met on the hallway in our building for that month, or the shopkeeper down on the street, or the person we have heard about on the local newsletter for that neighborhood that was like a community organizer, or the local a real estate agent, right? The local reporter. And we would just send an email to all of them and say, hey, we're hosting this dinner. We're just here for another few days. It's free pizza. And we just want to share some neighborhood stories. And people showed up. People who have never met, people that never met each other. And those became some of the most emotional nights we have actually had in New York. And we just asked this one question in the beginning: what is your neighborhood story? And that's also why I was so excited to see your podcast, because I feel like you found a way to extend this dinner moments into something to share with the entire world. But I also wonder, do you ever think about going IRL? Do you ever think, now that, New York City and other places are opening up a little bit, do you ever think about maybe doing a neighborhood dinner or having a Susan Vega in front of an actual audience?
Yes, that's a great question. When we conceived of the idea and we originally sketched out this season, it was going to have 4 or 5 live events at the museum. The virtual events that you described were going to be live. We're going to record the podcast before a live audience. And that's still the model that I seek to implement. So wherever we go next, as I'm having these conversations, that is a component to it. And I think the other thing is, if you really want to understand a place, you have to understand what it's like to be a kid there. And if you really want to understand a person, you have to understand where they came from. And I do think that eventually I would like to see an educational component to the show where not only are we interviewing kind of people who are kind of already into the second act of life or third act of life, but engaging younger people who are in their hometown stories now, to think about them. Because, for me, growing up, Newburgh was a place to leave, right? The idea was always, I'm going to go to college someday. And, I used to joke, kind of quoting from the Tin Man from the Wizard of Oz when I was a kid, someday they're going to erect a statue to me in this town, like, bigger things. And it was only later, after I had read and studied and lived in places like Boston, that I fell back in love with Newburgh, but with a degree of curiosity and rigor that I only could have gotten from being away. My point being that I wish that when I was growing up, instead of just simple field trips to the local historical site, there had been a deeper engagement in school with just my town story. I wish that we had been trained to interview people that are now gone. Like when I was a kid, I remember we had a local event at our school, and all the kids like, oh, this is so boring, it's so dumb. It was one of the last surviving World War I veterans in our community, Hamilton Fish. It would have been fascinating to talk to him. Why didn't anyone kind of plant that seed? I think I got that from my family, but I think collectively, I would love to see and find ways for kids as part of school projects or individually to learn the skill and the meaning of interviewing people and collectively telling their story. And this is vitally important also, I should add, Felix, because so many hometowns are drying up, either through climate change, people are moving, or they're too marginalized economically, they're too hot, what have you. And we're seeing an incredible death of local news. So many newspapers have died. Thousands in the last 20 years. In many towns, there's no newspaper left. So you think to yourself, who's going to tell the story of that town? Who's going to be the archive? And I wish there were a way for us to activate young people to become that first draft just through investigating their hometown stories. So there's more to come. I mean, I'm one person, I have a great team. And of course, there's the reality of life, the pandemic, but I do have aspirations for the show that are beyond just the episodes, as important as they are. I see it as part of a broader mission to get people. It's like what I say, I'm calling for a new great awakening to place, and it has many dimensions to it.
And if you look at the chat, the community is here to help. You already got some applications here for the educational component. Such a wonderful idea. Also, there was a shout out to the StoryCorps, the Radio Rookies program. I want to throw in the Moth. There are all these initiatives that might be interested in connecting with you around that. And, what I was going to ask you just as sort of like a final question is, you and your parents who are here, at least listening, Sharon and Brian, you started a nonprofit movie theater in Newburgh.
Yes.
I find this an amazing thing, an amazing story. It is highly successful. Pre-pandemic, you have sold tens of thousands of tickets a year. So you clearly have actually done something very tangible, very physical for your neighborhood, for your hometown of Newburgh. But what is your advice to us who are maybe not in a position to go back where we are from and start a movie theater? Because maybe our family has moved and is gone, but we still feel that connection. What could we all do to connect differently with our hometowns and with our home neighborhoods? What is your advice for us, for the ones of us that think, well, I don't know how to give back. I don't know how to do that, what you do.
That's a great question. And I salute to my parents. We are actually actively discussing reopening the theater post-pandemic, because of course had to be shut down the last 15 months or so. And so that's a big chore ahead. My father is really carrying the burden of that. He's the executive director of the theater. And that experience has taught me that both my parents are former teachers, that a theater is more than that. It's a community space. It's like the local bookstore, and that so many people would come to the movie theater and didn't care what movie we're showing because they liked the feeling that my parents created in that lobby because they were seen. And the conversation might start about, what are you playing this week? But it would never end there. And we have even on our wall sort of a series of pictures of people that have been dear customers to us who have since died, and they become part of the Downing story, the Downing Film Center story. So in terms of connecting, I mean, I can relate to that a little bit because I've lived in Boston, I've lived in New York, and I'm because the pandemic physically separated from my hometown. This is probably the longest stretch I've ever gone without being there. It's almost a year. And I would say there are many ways to do this. First of all, the people that are in your network, your immediate family and your friends, talk about it, ask about it, if they're there or not there. Keep those stories alive. Mm-hmm. 2, look on social media, which, so much of us associate social media with uprooting us from place. But I've noticed one of the hidden stories of places like Facebook, which has a lot of problems otherwise, are the number of local groups that are actually coalescing because people are spread out. There's a Remembering Newburgh Facebook group that I belong to, that my brother got me interested in. And I would say that it's one of the dominant forces of my Facebook feed is Remembering Newburgh. So look for local groups that are connected. Support local news. If there's a newspaper in your community, subscribe to it. Buy a digital subscription. If it can be physically mailed to you, do it. There is no greater threat to our democracy right now than the evaporation of local news. Democracy, it's a national story. I know since 2016, it's been the story, kind of what's happening in Washington. Democracy happens locally. So support the storytellers who are telling the local story, even if you're not there. Be engaged with it. Find out who's the mayor of your town. What are the issues that are happening there? Are there ways to support nonprofits that are trying to survive, even if you can't physically go there? Can you become a member of the local nonprofit movie theater, the local historical society? Can you support the local library? Its institutions are its glue, its cement. And then, in your own sort of life, be an ambassador for that place. Don't be Pollyannish about it. As you saw when I talked about Newburgh in the beginning, I have great affection for Newburgh, but I try not to be blind to it. I don't see it through rose-colored glasses. I want to engage the real Newburgh. So talk about it, tell its story. And I think that's really, being in the world, be conscious of place where you are. And also, more than anything, don't forget that wherever you live now, there are young people growing up. So New York, people always think of New York City as a place that people move to realize their dreams, but it's also a city full of children. So wherever you live, be mindful that it's their hometown and they're coming of age there. And what kind of place is it for them to grow up to and come back to? Will they have a stake in the local there? Those would be some of my broadest pieces of advice.
Wow. Your hometown is much more than a podcast. It is a mission. And I'm so glad that we had the chance to dive in with you, Kevin. I want to share one more action piece that just came in through the chat. Pamela, who is here. So hi, Pamela, welcome to Remote Daily, is actually going around to stoop sales, buy special finds for people that she hasn't met yet. And then walking around Brooklyn, she will encounter the people that are for. How cool is that? I think we should do an entire episode around that, Pamela. Thank you. And thank you, Sarah, for sharing that. Wow. Your hometown at its best. And Kevin, we always give the last word of Remote Daily to our guests. So I know you have shared a lot and I've learned so much from you today. But maybe there's one last thing, maybe an advice you heard on the show, maybe something your parents just told you, or something that you carry with you as your live mantra. What is something you would like to share with us on this Wednesday, before we part ways today?
Wonderful. Felix, thank you so much for having me. If you want to learn more of the show, of course, you can visit our website, yourhometown.org. And I guess I would say, let me finish this interview the way that I finish every broadcast, which is to remind everyone that everyone is from someplace and everywhere is somewhere. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Kevin.